Welcome to the Hyper Guy Motivational Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I have an amazing guest today. I always have amazing guests on here. I'm really lucky. Another inspirational person I'm going to have on here, Mr. Joe Garcia. Joe Garcia is an accomplished writer. He writes for CalMatters, a nonprofit organization that is a nonprofit news organization. And he's an accomplished writer, and he actually started his writing career all by himself. Unlike many of us that have to go to school for many, many years, Joe actually honed his skills himself over the years. Joe has some amazing articles, and we're going to talk about that today. He has two amazing articles he wrote for the New Yorker magazine, and he is a former UCLA Bruin, and he's a formerly incarcerated person. He was down for 21 years, and he's going to talk about how he's kind of turned his life around in his story. Joe, thank you so much for being here today, brother.
Great to see you.
Thank you just for taking the time out. We've known each other for probably a little more than a year now or more. And I kind of knew a little bit about your story, and it's a pretty amazing story. And I guess the first thing I always start with people is, where were you born and raised?
I was born in San Francisco and raised pretty much all around the Bay Area.
And then what was it like growing up? Were you close to your parents, and what was growing up like for you?
Man, I had the greatest parents. They had me in their 40s. My mom had been told early on that she couldn't have any children, so it was just this huge surprise in a good way. And even before I came out the womb, she just always treated me like I was this beautiful, special miracle baby, and treated me with all that love and grace and devotion. So, and both my parents were that way. It was just amazing.
Oh, and before I go on a little bit, I want to mention the two articles just to put a little context in, so folks out there can look up these articles. The first article you wrote for the New Yorker was listening to Taylor Swift in prison. And was that published when you were incarcerated?
Yeah. I actually was in the whole administrative segregation and wrote the majority of that while I was in isolation.
And then your second article and I know there's it's like one of the most popular articles for the New Yorker for the year, like almost over 1 million views on that article.
Yeah,
and then
the first article was definitely popular.
And then your new article is From Life in Prison to the Aries Tour. And that came out when?
That just came out yesterday.
Wow, it's amazing. So we're going to get into the whole genesis of that and the whole kind of timeline for this. So you had a great childhood. What was it like? Your parents were really good. You said your mom and dad are really great. What was it like growing up in the Bay Area, and when did things start to kind of like unfold in your life in a negative way, I guess is the best way to say it?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the Bay Area was great. My parents nurtured me. They made me feel like I always had a voice. I was always a stakeholder in the family. I was the only child, so it was just the three of us. And from a very young age, they treated me like I was an intelligent being, like my opinion mattered. They would ask my opinion of, which house to buy, what kind of car to buy, all these kind of things, because they were like, you're a third of the family. We want us all to be happy here. So with that type of upbringing, I definitely always felt like I was entitled to everything, like the world is mine. And, inevitably that contributed to my criminality, of course. I went to UCLA right out of high school. Everything was going great, but I got more and more involved in recreational drugs. And it was so easy to, because of my parents, I didn't want to spend their money on drugs. And so it just became so easy to just be in the game and break even or make money. And as my years in college progressed, all of a sudden it was like, I'm a very viable drug dealer and I don't even need to graduate or why am I going to go to school? I have a money-making career. And so that was my mindset. And those things just kept me sort of on what I would say is a downward trajectory in terms of being in situations that might prove dangerous to the average person. And I kind of knew that going in, that I'm putting myself in more and more at-risk situations. But that's part of my character. I love driving fast. I love, back then I loved gambling, taking risks with, my character, my life, my well-being. And so then I was in a situation that turned really volatile, and I ended up shooting and killing another drug dealer.
So how did you get it? Like, how did you enter? Or I guess was it weed? Was your gateway drug? Did that started happening prior to college, or when you started going to college? And then was it hard to find a job? Like, how did this all transpire? I guess start. How did your drug use start? I guess.
Well, really, it was the other way around. In the 80s, because I went to high school in the 80s, it was really about cocaine and crystal meth and speed, right? And the funny thing is, back then in high school, people would offer me weed to smoke, and I would be like, I'm not a stoner. Are you kidding me? I do real drugs. But then when I went into college, so much of the culture, just hanging out and socializing, really was around marijuana use. And ironically, I know this sounds so contrarian to what I'm saying, but I'm definitely conscious of my health. And so right around that time, I just realized putting these chemicals in my body was like a terrible idea. But there was such an organic nature to marijuana that I kind of quickly segued to smoking marijuana. It was natural, it was peaceful, everybody's happy go lucky and good spirited usually around marijuana. And so that became like my drug of choice, and definitely my business model of choice.
So how did you get into it? Were you going to classes and then like someone said, "Hey, you know what? You can make a little money. You can make a little money if you sell marijuana." Like, how did that work? Did you have find people on campus to sell it to, or I mean, how did that work?
It's really just about networking, right? I Even before I became a quote unquote reporter, I love asking questions, getting to the bottom of stuff. So it was all about finding the best weed, making connections. And then because I was affluent and my parents treated me so well, I was one of the few people as a freshman at UCLA with my own car. And so there would be all these opportunities. And I was like, well, I'll drive. And, I want like my stake in this thing. I want to get a deal. I want to get, and while this was all going on, more and more people, just by kind of my their perception of me and the culture there, people would just come out of the woodwork and be like, "Hey, aren't you the weed guy? Hey, you think you can help me?" And so right away that kind of became my identity freshman year. And it's one of those identities that sticks.
So when did it take over? You started moving into selling it?
Mhm.
When did it become a problem that led up to the situation where someone's life was taken? Like, could you see yourself slipping? Could you see yourself slipping before it happened, or it was kind of like, oh man, now I put myself in a situation
No,
like
it was pretty sudden. I mean, life was going, by all accounts, really great for me, right? I was making money. I had my beautiful partner with me. My parents, would tell me, we really want to see you get into like a legitimate line of work. But for most accounts, I was happy. And then I was pursuing another career. So the day that I committed my crime, I had a job interview right before I went to this drug dealer's house. And it was like one of those job interviews, everything went well. So I was kind of in the process of getting out of the business. But it's kind of one of those things I've learned since then is you're never out of it till you're really out of it. And so having this like 1 foot in, 1 foot out mentality, that never really works. And my crime is like a perfect example of how that all backfired like in an instant.
so. When you're arrested for um, taking someone else's life,
Mhm.
how did you transition to that? I think some of your stories talk about how difficult that was. Can you tell me how difficult that was? Because you went from having all this,
Yeah.
you had a car and a nice apartment, and then you went overnight to, you
Mhm.
know, a dank cells and being moved to all these different prisons. And
Mhm.
Can you please tell me that how that transition was for you? And one of the things that I really like about your article too is you talked about how painful it was, you in a relationship, and then how that was disappointing to your partner at the time, and all your emotions and stuff that you were going through there, and then you receiving a life sentence. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle, or the thing maybe not everyone understands, is that before I committed my crime, I looked at people in jail, people in prison, people who had committed a murder. I mean, I looked at them as like, kind of like a monster, or like the worst of the worst. And it is just so profound to all of a sudden have that mask put on you and to be like, geez, now I'm one of the worst people. I killed another person, right? Like, I didn't wake up this morning thinking that this would happen. And by the end of the day, I'm in LA County Jail. Um, I'm not trying to say that I didn't do this crime. I've never said, oh, it wasn't me, it was somebody else, right? So it's like just being accountable. It's like, I'm probably going to go to prison for the rest of my life based on, I took another life. If the situation were reversed, I would want the person who killed me to like be locked away forever, right? If somebody killed one of my loved ones or my family. So, knowing that I was that bad guy was probably the hardest thing for me to overcome, right? Just that personal insight, like, geez, it's one thing to say I fucked up, but to mess up that bad and such serious consequences, like, I can't ever apologize to my victim. I can't ever make up for it. And so that the weight of that was just incredibly hard to deal with. And then on top of that, not even really knowing anything about the system, lo and behold, I'm in one of the worst places to be incarcerated in the universe, right? Like Los Angeles County Jail in the early aughts, during the era of mass incarceration, overcrowding, full on gang banging. So yeah, I mean, it was one of those things I had to navigate. I think the main thing that got me through it is my upbringing, and then just my character. I ask a lot of questions. I want to know, like, how are we supposed to program? How are we supposed to go about our day to day? I want to try and get along with everybody as best I can. And so all those type of factors played into how I navigated it.
And I assume you were at the Twin Towers at the time, huh?
Men's Central, and
Mhm.
it was all such a dystopian, weird environment that was completely new to me. And not just new to me in the physical environment, but the culture, the way people communicate in a jail setting, in a prison setting, and then dealing with, the authoritarian sheriffs and everything controlling every movement and all that. So yeah, I was mainly in Men's Central Jail, and then also I spent a lot of time. There's like a satellite facility by where Magic Mountain is, that's also part of Los Angeles County, and it's called Wayside Honor Ranch. And that's like a supermax high security place. And so most of my time was spent there, but I would have to keep going back and forth and get transferred around and everything.
So, what was it like transitioning from the county facilities to the state facilities? And was there a big difference between the county jail and the state prisons in terms of the culture?
Yeah, for sure. Things are much more structured and subdued in the prison system, in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The crazy thing about Los Angeles County Jail, because not everybody's there at different stages of their adjudication. And so it's just a very transient, there's always chaos, there's always different people, and there's always struggles for control, different gang factions, different ethnic things. And it's never set in stone because, tomorrow, 10 or 20 of these guys might be gone somewhere else. And then a new bunch of characters comes in. And so there's everyone is just looking. I think it's just a human aspect to look for stability. And so everyone is looking for stability in this just like whirlwind of activity. So, but because I ask a lot of questions, one of the things so many of the OGs told me while I was in jail is, hey, look, the prison system, it is so much better than being here in jail. So if you can survive and deal with this, you will be fine wherever you go. And that did prove true.
So when you entered the prison system, um, you were given life with the possibility of parole. And was there any one point, or was there ever a point you said, am I ever gonna get out of here? I mean,
Mhm.
were you ever out of such a low place that you didn't feel like you were ever gonna get out?
Yeah, the vast majority of the time. I was given a 43 years to life sentence. And at the time of my arrest and then conviction later, anybody with a life sentence was never going to go home. You could have like 7 years. There are guys right now in prison still who started off with a 7 years to life sentence in the late 70s or 80s, and they still haven't gotten out. So, any type of life sentence, all that means is there might be an opportunity, but you never know. There's no guarantee. And then at the time with the 43 years to life, my first opportunity would be in 2046. And so that's so far off in the distance when I started my sentence. And then what would it mean to get out of prison in my 70s and reemerge into society and not know what was waiting for me, to be starting over at like 76?
And what was your relationship like with your parents when you went into custody? That must have been very traumatic for them because you were only child. You were always kind of taken care of. What was that like for them? And are your parents still alive today? And did you miss out? I know you missed out on a lot of milestones for them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, each of my parents passed while I was incarcerated. And, growing up, because they had me in their 40s, they had always had this mindset that we're not going to be around forever. Most of your friends' parents are far younger than us. So we want to appreciate every moment. We want you to appreciate every moment. And so there were never any, like when my parents passed, it's not like there were all kinds of things I wish I had told them. I mean, all my life we knew where we stood on everything. And so that's one thing I'm fortunate about. But the deal, it was kind of an unwritten deal, like, hey, you might need to take care of us when we get older. And that was something I was always happy, almost looking forward to. I want to give back the people that took such great care of me. I want to give back. And so, another sad part of my incarceration is that I didn't get those opportunities. And their health really, I think that because of all the stress of me being incarcerated and all the heartache, their health really declined rapidly once I committed my. And so I feel like, aside from all the other things I'm responsible for, all the bad things, I think I probably robbed my parents of like 10 or 20 years of their lives just by being incarcerated because they were just so worried about me.
When you're going through a transformation, there's many people in prison that don't go through the transformation you do, where you look at yourself critically and try to become a better person and realize, although I may never get out, I need to make the best of the time I have inside. You mentioned some of the regrets that you had about the relationships with your parents. Do you ever regret getting into using drugs and selling? And do you ever regret any of that when you think about it? Like, I wish I wouldn't have got into that. Or what was that process like for you? Like, how do you explain that to people? Like, I regret doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, none of it was worth it. And being a teenager, being young and dumb, and then thinking you have all the answers, my parents and my partner would always be like, why do you do that? Why do you do all the stupid stuff you do? And I would be like, I know what I'm doing. I got this, right? And for the most part, I did. But then getting caught up in the criminal situation and committing this terrible crime, obviously now I know that I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so I think that to me is really the underlying factor of like that started my rehabilitation, to really take a look at myself and be like, you thought you had all the answers, and bro, you don't have any answers. You gotta start from the beginning and rethink this.
At what point in your time that you were in prison did you start to like say, hey, I have to make the best out of this, and I need to move away from the criminal behavior and the criminal thinking, and in some ways not be so selfish? Because what I'm hearing a lot of what you're talking about is like, it's just about me, right? I was getting what I wanted. At what point did you realize like, I can't be this way anymore? Like, what caused you to make that change?
I think a lot of it was my experience in Los Angeles County Jail and seeing all the different people struggling with the same type of dynamic that I am, like defining yourself and not necessarily defining yourself in a good way. And like every single knucklehead I met in jail thought they knew everything, thought they had it all figured out. And I could see them, like from my perception, looking at them, I could be like, this guy's an idiot, right? But then it's like, well, there's probably a million people looking at me and like I'm the idiot. So I think that was probably the most eye-opening thing. Just, I always wanted to be this like drug dealer, this like badass, whatever you want to call it. Now here I am in a dorm in a facility full of badasses. And it really just showed how we're all making like some of the dumbest decisions imaginable on a daily basis regularly. And that's why we were all in there.
In terms of like the prison politics and the prison culture, how did you manage the prison culture? Was it something that was easy for you, or was it hard to stay away from, the politics and the drama inside, or could you even do that?
I was just very fortunate. I think one, I was older when I first became incarcerated. So I committed my crime when I was 33. And, based on everything I've told you so far, no one's going to tell me what to do, basically, right? Like, I'm not some dumb kid where, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to follow the leader. Yes, sir. And so it was really like the racial thing was very confusing to me. People would ask me, where are you from? What are you? What is you? Right. And I didn't know what they meant, but they really meant like my race, because, if you look at me without knowing my last name, I could be all kinds of different things. Right. But my last name instantly implies that I'm Mexican, and I am. I'm half Mexican. My mom was Chinese. And so when I started struggling, like in my first week in LA County Jail in a dorm with all these different people asking me, like, what is you? Who do you run with? All that. When I started figuring out what they were asking, I would say, like, well, I'm half Chinese and half Mexican. And just, again, a lot of it is just really good fortune. But right at the beginning, someone, the blacks had kind of told me, hey, if you're half Asian, I mean, Asians program with us. So you have all these Mexicans trying to tell you what to do, but you could just tell them, fuck it and ride with us. And looking around at the culture there, Black culture is far more similar to the type of culture I'm used to than any other culture. And so right away, early on in my incarceration, I became this guy that hung out with all the blacks and the blacks accepted. And so, I can't tell you how fortunate I am that the Black community embraced me and treated me as one of them. And so that's one of the things I'll never forget about my incarceration. Now, when you get to the CDCR, there's a clear-cut choice as far as being what they call an other, which is kind of a conglomeration of different Asians and some other ethnicities. But others have it pretty good in terms of not dealing with all the terrible politics and all that. And so right away, I was an other. And again, I was accepted by the Asian community because I'm half Chinese. But there was always kind of like a not a full acceptance, right? It was always like, that's the guy that says he's half Asian, right? But either way, and so even then, I was not considered all in terms of like the Asians, but enough where they left me alone. And so my entire incarceration has sort of been, I'm a guy that can run my own program. And you can only run your own program and get away with it if you are an upstanding type of person, right? Like if you're doing drugs and running up debts and gambling and getting into all kinds of stupid situations, you're going to get dealt with. But if you're a solid guy and don't cause any trouble, people for the most part are going to leave you alone. And so, again, it's kind of part of my rehabilitation. I'm in prison. I'm navigating all these things, but I'm doing it from a standpoint of integrity, right? I'm I'm living up to my promises. I'm keeping my word, right? And you know how prison is. Like, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, then you better go do it, right? Or you're going to look bad. But, that's also another thing. Like, well, just don't make promises that you're not going to keep and you'll be fine. And so people really do like respect that type of integrity. And so I did fine. It was really easy for me to navigate.
And what institutions were you at?
Oh man, it's crazy how many prisons you go through. My very first, well, you start in reception center, and so I was in like Kern County, like I think Old Delano is what they call it or whatever. And I was only there for like a couple months, and boom, right away I got sent to Calipatria level 4. But for however it worked out, I was on like what they would call like an honor yard on level 4, like a programming yard. And I guess the history of Calipat, there's been all kinds of riots, violence, all that, but that was all before I got there. And so everybody there was sort of in a state of like, we're going to try and like just abide by the rules and like just leave, the officers were like, we're going to try and leave you guys alone. Don't attack us. And, from the incarcerated standpoint, it's like, hey, just don't mess with the officers and they're just going to let us do what we do. And so it just kind of all worked out. I mean, there were cell phones everywhere, drugs everywhere. When consequences led up to it, there were like stabbings and all that kind of stuff. But then, a lot of time we were just on lockdown anyway, so didn't matter. I had a crazy Vietnamese cellmate as like my first long-term cellmate, but he was a stand-up guy and he respected the fact that I didn't do all this stupid stuff, right? So we would have these crazy conversations. He just always called me like a schoolboy and stuff, like, oh, you schoolboy, all this kind of, but there was some love there. It's so weird to think about two prisoners in a cell, but you end up having this like camaraderie and this love, and it's like a positive thing.
When did you start processing like accountability wise, like I took somebody's life and processing that and what you might have done to someone else's family and the impact of what you did? When did you start processing that and how did you deal with it?
I think the main thing was like during my trials, right? Where one, I was confronted by my victim's family, not confronted, but just seeing him in the courtroom and really seeing the way they reacted to the prosecutor's description of the crime and then also the crime scene photos. And I just always thought of like, what would it be for my parents or for my partner to be in a courtroom and see photos of like my dead murdered body and hear a prosecutor telling the murderer, like, you did this and you did that. And, so that really like thinking about it and like wondering how they must be processing it and seeing their grief, that really left an impact on me. And then also, there were two women who were kind of like eyewitnesses to the crime. They lived across the street and kind of saw things through a window or whatever. I I don't agree with their retelling of what they saw, right? But nevertheless, the impact of whatever happened and whatever they think they saw, the impact of that on them stuck with me through my whole incarceration. And because I had two different trials, they came in and testified at my first trial, and they also had to come in 3 years later and testify again at my separate trial. And both times, like, they were not happy to be there, right? Like, they called 911, but I don't think when they called 911 they realized that that would entail this whole legal process for years to come. And so just seeing that and seeing what a terrible experience it was, even though they're just good Samaritans, right? They just heard something, saw something, they called 911, and now they're caught up in all this trauma that was not their decision. I brought that on them, right? And so seeing that, this is before I even went to prison, all those images and those memories, like, they still stick with me.
So Joe, you were saying, were you ever an ad sig at some point? You said, were you an ad?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, ironically, I spent like almost 20 years in prison, no problems, no disciplinary problems, and then uh, my last 6 months at San Quentin, I was in the hole for that time.
What happened? Why were you?
I was the Inmate Advisory Council president of San Quentin, and this is during the COVID era when the population has all kinds of grievances about the way the program's being implemented, all the COVID policies. You got to wear a wet mask, you got to get tested. To go to your college class, you've got to take like a rapid test. And then if it tests positive, you can't go to class and your entire building's getting locked down. All these things. There were shortages in the canteen. They were trying new housing models. So they opened up a single cell housing unit, and the way that they were deciding who got to live in that housing unit was not transparent. So people were very upset, like, why can't I live in there? Who gets to live in there? All that kind of stuff. So anyway, these are all examples of the type of issues I had to speak with administration about. And then in the midst of that, some of the words I chose to use in public were considered incendiary. And so, based on a bunch of confidential informant interviews, they decided that I should be placed in ADSEG for security reasons.
So can you tell me how you became a writer? Like I said, you have two amazing articles that came out in the New Yorker, which is an amazing magazine. It's been one of the best magazines in the country for many years. How did that transpire? How did you become such a good writer? Were you always a good writer? And how did this happen?
Yeah. I mean, I would be remiss if I did not say that I always believed in myself, that I'm like potentially the greatest writer in the universe, right? That's just part of my character. And, I was instrumental in starting a high school newspaper when I was in high school, which was a really great experience for me. And then when I went to college, I always had all these dreams of being a writer, writing a novel, living in Los Angeles, writing a screenplay, the whole Hollywood dream. But the drug dealing and the lifestyle always got in the way, and I never accomplished those things, never even made a lot of effort to do those things. And then now I'm in prison with all kinds of time on my hands, and I ended up at San Quentin and thought I could easily work for the newspaper based on what I'd read. I write better than you guys. Here I am. You should be happy I'm here. That wasn't taken too well by the guys in the newsroom. And so it took me about a year or so to earn my way onto the staff in the San Quentin News. But no, I've always felt like I could write. My academic writing was always good. I was always an A student. And then in the same way I approached academic writing, I approached learning to be a reporter. And I did hone my skills in terms of self-motivation and self-drive, but I had a great support network of people who came into San Quentin and volunteered their time, really accomplished journalists. And so based on the skills they helped me learn and just the conversations that I had with so many of them about storytelling and about looking for a story and about having access to things that nobody else could. But then I think another catalyst was, the COVID experience. People were looking for stories from inside prison about what the heck's going on during COVID. And I gave a voice to a lot of the things people were wondering about from the outside.
So how did you think of the first article that we talked about that over 1 million people have downloaded or read it is listening to Taylor Swift in prison. How did the New Yorker find you? And then why did Taylor Swift impact you so much? And I think one of the things you were saying was you didn't even realize who Taylor Swift was or her music, and then it kind of like there's a genesis out of that. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, it's crazy for me, right, to be sitting around bobbing my head, like loving these Taylor Swift albums. Like that's a crazy thing for me to wrap my head around, but that was the reality. And so during COVID, I was writing a lot of stories for the Prison Journalism Project. And I would kind of, since I'm talking about what's going on in my building, in my cell, I would throw in some reality, like besides all the ugliness, I got Taylor Swift bumping around in my head, or thank goodness for Taylor Swift. I'd be losing my mind if I didn't have her music to listen to. And so some of my editors were like, dude, why do you keep throwing Taylor Swift in there? And I kind of was like, well, we're kind of like a startup organization. I don't think it would hurt to have Taylor Swift mentioned in there. It'd probably get more clicks on our stories and everything. Like, it's a good thing that I'm mentioning Taylor Swift, right? But anyway, I wrote a album review about Midnights, and I submitted it to Prison Journalism Project. And there was a lot of things they liked about it, but rather than publish it, they just kind of started passing it around. And then there was a woman who was volunteering for a Prison Journalism Project who had also volunteered inside San Quentin. And she really liked a lot of the stuff in it. And she passed it on to the New Yorker editor. And so, all of a sudden I'm starting to get these messages like, hey, we're the New Yorker. We don't really do album reviews, but there's all kinds of stories within this album review framing that would make a good personal essay. Would you be willing to like forget about the album review, but come up with some other idea? And that was like, I really got those communications right before I went to the hole. So now all of a sudden I'm in the hole. I'm in isolation, don't have any of my property, don't have any of my music to listen to, nothing, just alone in an empty cell. And it got me thinking like, I have this opportunity. I'm not going to squander it. And so I came up with that first article.
And so, can you tell me that, like, what did you talk about in the article, and how did you process it? What did you talk about, and why was it meaningful for you?
Well, I think it's sort of like an explanation in terms of, and also it's an examination myself of like, what is it about Taylor Swift's music that catches me, right? And so much of it, because she is such a storyteller in regards to romance and true love, and like searching for true love, not settling for anything but true romance. And I had all that with the woman I loved before I was incarcerated. And so one of the things that really kept me sane was thinking about the woman I love. We weren't together anymore. She'd gone her own way. I have a life sentence. But thinking about her and at least reminding myself that I was even capable of that type of love and that type of connection just made me feel like, as terrible as it is, the crime I committed, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, you are like the worst of the worst, right? Like, you did this terrible thing. You deserve to be in prison. But then I would also think, well, I'm also capable of like this incredible love. And so that kind of helped me even out like my own thoughts about myself. And so those are all the reasons why I would just listen to Taylor Swift's lyrics more and more, and it would just really resonate within me. And then I kind of wanted to explain to the world that, as crazy as this may sound, this 50 plus year old guy serving a life sentence is like a huge Taylor Swift fan for all the right reasons.
And then what were some of those reasons?
Her lyrics, the magic behind her lyrics. I'm really into music and into lyrics, and I really think she's like the greatest songwriter like ever, right?
So,
And I mean, I know that sounds crazy. I mean, and this was in the first piece, but I really thought Prince was the greatest songwriter ever. I love Prince. And then here I am listening to Taylor Swift, and I'm like, at first I'm like, wow, she's got some talent. Like I can start to buy into this. And then album after album, song after song, it's like she just keeps doing it over and over and over. And it just blew me away from a musical standpoint, from a lyrical standpoint. So I consider her just like such a great true artist of our time. And she's only like, she's about to be, I think, 36 or something like that. Like, my God, she's got decades of good work ahead of her. It's astounding.
And what was the reaction when you wrote the first article? You wrote the first article, you were able to get out of prison because of the good behavior and all the insight and all the work you did. You get out of prison, the article was already published. And what kind of feedback did you get from the article?
Oh, it's crazy. I've been in like journalism circles where a reporter that I know who's like my friend will introduce me to people as, do you remember that article about listening to Taylor Swift in prison? This is the guy that wrote it. And so it was a little awkward being introduced that way. But then there are other times where, I'll have interactions with people. I was just at a journalism conference last week, and, we'll be talking about all the other work I do. And then somewhere during the conference or later on the conversation, someone will be like, hey, wait a minute. Are you the guy that wrote that? And I'll be like, yeah. And they'll be like, that article blew me away. Like that. I'll never forget reading that. That was an incredible article. So it's moments like that where, it's a badge of honor. Like it's weird to be labeled as like the Taylor Swift guy, but at the same time, it's pretty awesome too.
And then when you got out,
Mhm.
you very rarely does somebody get out, and as soon as they get out, you're no longer on parole. You've discharged. But when you got out, you had the opportunity from the New Yorker,
Mhm.
said, "Hey, would you like to come to the Taylor Swift concert?"
Mhm.
And you were able to go, and it was another state. What was that experience like for you to be at the Taylor Swift concert? Here you are, you've been out of prison for such a short time. Next thing you know, that's scary in itself because you were down for so long.
Mhm.
And now you're on a plane
Mhm.
flying to another state to watch the Taylor Swift concert, which is very hard to get tickets for. So I applaud the New Yorker for being able to get those tickets for you. But how was the concert for you, and what was that like for you?
It was just really surreal. I mean, you hear about I was a big concert person before I got incarcerated. So I love concerts, loves hearing music live, all these kind of things. The Eras tour is just a whole nother animal in and of itself because it's so epic and so big, and it's 3 hours plus, and every single song she performs in that 3 hours is somebody's favorite song. It's like a super big hit. And yet I think that every single person in that arena where I went, it was at the where the Indianapolis Colts play. So it was like almost 70,000 people. And I would guarantee that every single person in there probably had two or three songs that they were really upset she didn't play. But, she has so many songs and such a huge catalog for all these performances. And so, I mean, it was incredible. And just to be there, to be part of that particular community, right? So it's like, just imagine it's like 69 plus thousand people, and the majority of them are white women wearing pink and glitter. And, to just be part of that beauty and that magic for like 3 hours where we're all losing our minds. Uh, it was really special. I mean, it was just, icing on the cake. I didn't need that to validate my freedom or anything, but it was definitely a magical experience.
So all the writing that you did inside at San Quentin, and then when you got out, you republished this with the New Yorker. You got out. That kind of led into other writing jobs and journalism jobs, which that's why you work for you're a reporter now and a journalist
Mhm.
right now. Did the New Yorker magazine ask you, "Hey, can you write an article following up with the other article, like from my life in prison to the Aries tour?"
Mhm.
Did you, or the Eras tour? Did they ask you to write this article? And what was your process for writing the second article?
Well, the second article really came about long before I was released. the New Yorker editor, who is this phenomenal guy, we had started talking when I would have conversations with him and tell him about the parole process, right? I knew I was eventually going to have a parole hearing within the next year or so, but I was also in the hole and all kinds of things went wrong at San Quentin. And now I have this perfect record that's blemished. And it's incredibly hard to go through the parole process successfully, even without any blemishes. And now here I am right close to my hearing, having this blemish, this stain that I would need to answer to. And so having conversations with the New Yorker editor, he was like, well, you should probably like journal this or write this. And I was like, this would be a story you guys would want. And he would be like, yeah, the way you talk about parole, most people don't understand the ins and outs of having to go through this incredibly personal, cathartic experience to sort of earn your freedom. And so I started just documenting my thoughts, right? How I was looking at myself preparing for parole. And then, I'm writing all this stuff on the GTL prison tablet in like 2,000 character chunks and sending it to the New Yorker editor. And we don't, I don't know when my hearing's going to be. Then I find out when my hearing is. I have to go to the psychological review before the hearing. All these different factors, we have no idea what the outcome is. And so it was kind of nice to be writing about it without knowing what the ending was going to be. But then also writing about it from this like position of optimism where you sort of have to believe that you're going to be found suitable. You have to believe you're the type of person that can be found suitable for parole. And so it was just this whole journey. And that was all separate. Then I get out of prison and I'm continuing to write about reentry, about being reconnected with the woman I love. And then, within a month of that, this opportunity to go to the Eras Tour happened. And I really believe they were completely two separate stories. And so on the plane ride to Indianapolis, I'm sitting with the New Yorker editor. He had to go to the concert with me to satisfy my parole conditions, so they knew I had a chaperone. We're on the airplane, and I'm asking him, so what's up with this parole story? I gave you all these words on this epic parole story. And, he tells me right next to me on this airplane, he's like, I think we're just going to combine it all into one big story. And I'm just like, okay, well, let's see how that goes. And anyway, the end result is the story that came out yesterday.
So the first story is more about the music and how it influenced you and how it kept you going. The second story was more about more of an intimate detail of kind of like your feelings and emotions and stuff as you're going through the process. And what advice would you give anybody listening today to overcoming difficult obstacles? And you have any advice for anybody out there about how you overcame and what advice you give to other people just when they have to deal with serious challenges, and what you did or what you suggest people can use as a tool to overcome challenges?
Wow, that's a big question. I would say remember who you are, remember who you really are, who you are at your best, because you can be your best at any given moment. Just like you can be your worst at any given moment, you can be your best at any given moment. And so I just believe that if you can find that in yourself, and also just think back to whatever it is where you had fun, where you had positive, you sort of it's almost like being haunted by ghosts, but the good ghosts, right? Like your memories, the people who cared about you. And, I want to say that I couldn't have done any of this without just an incredible support network, right? Not just of my family, the woman I love on the outside, not just all the professionals and colleagues that like really took interest in my career, but just on the incarcerated side, right? Having guys in your building, in the cells next door to you to talk to bounce ideas off of, to talk about rehabilitation and reentry and hanging on to hope. And, it's such a simple thing. Somebody just comes by your cell, especially during COVID, and is like, hey, are you all right in there? Like, what's going on? And you end up having like a 5 or 10 minute conversation just out of the blue, nothing really heavy that you're talking about, but it's those little interactions that really can sustain you, right? And so not only should you be looking for those interactions to come your way, but you should also be looking to bring those interactions to other people, right? And so really quickly, when I would be on the other side of the bars, I would stop by and check in on guys, but it's very valuable for my own soul to like show empathy and concern for somebody else, because you can just kind of feel that in your heart, warming your heart. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to like deal with adversity. And I think it just starts with taking a good hard look at yourself and trying to figure out like, what are you about? Like what's really important to you? What has value in your own life? And then just hanging on to those things in incremental ways. It's not some major overhaul. You just have to start small and just keep building in on steps.
So what do you have like future goals, like your future plans? What is Joe Garcia? Where is he at in 5 years from now? Are you going to continue with your journalism career? You're going to keep writing for the New Yorker? What are your future plans?
That's all up in the air. I mean, my personal plan is to continue with my writing career, and that can work out in a number of ways. I mean, I'll always be a journalist. I'll always be a writer. I definitely have all those Hollywood dreams still in terms of screenwriting, writing a novel. But yeah, I would say that it's a safe bet that before the 5 years is up, I will have published at least one book about my experience, it's kind of like what you and I were just talking about, the immense value in hanging on to positivity in tough times and just what that really means. And so that's probably what my first book is going to be about, but in the context of surviving incarceration.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I have to ask you a couple, always ask a little funny questions at the end here.
Yeah,
What is
I love it.
your guilty pleasures, food wise?
Oh, food wise,
Like when
God,
you
I
first
mean,
came out of prison, like what did you want to have? Like what's the first meal you had? Like, oh God, I had to have this.
I had breakfast with my partner. It's in the story. We just had a big breakfast of everything, biscuits and gravy, French toast. I love egg whites, right? So I'm always looking for like a good egg white scramble, bacon. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I saw this awesome vegetarian sandwich the other day, and I got it, and then I added bacon to it. It was incredible. So, but yeah, I'm a foodie. I mean, I love everything from like sashimi to. I mean, I had a nice medium rare steak last night. I mean, nothing is off limits. I think as long as you have a nice balanced diet, everything should be fine. I've been converted into an iced latte person. I used to never think coffee should be cold, but now I'm like, I need it cold. So something happened in the last year. There's a guy at a coffee shop in Hollywood, and he converted me, and so my partner considers him like the enemy for converting me. But it was great. Yeah, it's been a great experience.
Favorite music genre? Well, we know you like Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
We
I
know you
mean,
like Prince.
I have always loved like rap and hip hop, and it's tough because there is so much. I don't want to say negativity, but there's so much, criminality, misogyny, profanity. But I still love the swag. I still love listening to that stuff. And so it's great being out now with access to anything I want to listen to whenever I want to listen to. And that doesn't just include Taylor Swift, right? I mean, that includes, Kendrick Lamar, Lil Wayne. I mean, all the old Tupac stuff. I mean, my playlist is just a crazy conglomeration of all that stuff.
Yeah, what's the best? Can you give the names of your stories, how they can read these two stories? What's and give the titles, and then what's the best way they can follow you or your
Um,
stories in your writings?
yeah, I would just say for the two stories, just click on the New Yorker. I know there's a paywall, so you need a subscription, but I think the first article is, or something like that, right? Or I would just say, subscribe to the New Yorker. It's well worth it, even if you do a free test run and then get out later. But you know how all those subscriptions work. You get sucked in. The first story is listening to Taylor Swift in prison. And then the second article that just came out is From Life in Prison to the Eras Tour.
And what on your other stories they can read on CalMatters or what else?
I mean, there's CalMatters.org, which is a great nonprofit news organization, really great opportunity. And so, you know, my articles are on there, everything I've written for them. There's also Prison Journalism Project, which has tons of my old articles. And, you know, it's not just about me. There's just tons of great articles on all those sites. I think you can even do a deep dive into the San Quentin News website. And there's some really great old articles of mine there too, as long as tons of articles by a bunch of great incarcerated writers. It's not just about me. I know it may sound like it is, but there's tons of people. My experience is really not that unique. I just happen to have a really great platform right now.
Well, I appreciate it, Joe. Thank you so much for being on here. Until next time, everybody, until our next great guest, because we have lots of amazing guests like Joe on. Until next time, keep learning and see you soon. Take care.
Thank you so much, Fig. Appreciate you.